Hey everyone! I'm Albert Boris. The Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass is, in my opinion, one of the best Nintendo-related things to have happened this year. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was already a good enough port of Mario Kart 8 to begin with. Nobody expected it to get DLC, especially not 7 years after its original release, but it did. Over the next 2 years, we're getting 48 additional tracks, of which 16 are currently released. And out of these tracks, my favorite ones to have been playing so far are none other than the new city courses. These originally made their debut in Mario Kart Tour, where you had a whole array of different tracks based around real-life cities. There were around 2 to 4 variants of each city, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe did a clever thing in not only bringing them back for a new audience, but even combining the different variations into a single track, making each lap distinct from the other. It was such a revolutionary idea that I'm surprised we didn't get to see until now. I mean, sure, there were section tracks introduced in Mario Kart 7, but they weren't really loops like these ones are. It's no surprise why the city tracks are the ones I'm most excited for to try out whenever a new wave rolls around. Plus, I love traveling and geography myself. But that raises the question, how will these next few city tracks be incorporated into the game? So far, 4 of them have been released, but obviously there's going to be more. We already have 7 other city tracks that have been playable in Tour and will probably make it to 8 Deluxe, but how will the developers smash the different variants into a single track? That's what we'll be predicting in this video, the remaining city tracks and their potential routes in this game. With the 4 tracks released so far, we can look at how the developers combine the different variants and use it for reference for these next few tracks. I've personally noticed that the city tracks either receive a Tokyo treatment or a Sydney surgery. Tokyo treatment is a simpler one. Simply have a 1 lap correspond to 1 variant. It works in simple tracks like New York Minute and Tokyo Blur, but if the variants are complex in a way that that's not possible, as in maybe different starting points, you might have to merge and combine a few variants in just 1 lap to make it work, like in Sydney Sprint and Paris Promenade. But with all that being said, let's get started. I'll be going through the tracks in release order, which means the first track to discuss is London Loop. This is a pretty easy one to discuss. All 3 variants of London Loop have been released, so it won't be too difficult to narrow down a possible pathway. There is a catch though. London Loop 1 and 2 has you driving in the same direction, but London Loop 3 goes in the opposite direction. So how will we incorporate this? Well, first things first, lap 1 will probably include London Loop 1. If there is a pattern we've seen so far, it's that the first lap has almost always been the first variant. And it makes sense, since they're both usually simple, yet exciting enough to get you pumped up for the next laps. For the second lap, I'm thinking this. First, you will progress on London Loop 2 as normally, for Buckingham Palace and all that. But after you pass the London Eye across the Central Bridge, you do not turn to the right. That would lead to the finish line, but remember that London Loop 3 goes in the opposite direction. Of course, you could also just do London Loop 3 in reverse for the last lap, but that would be kind of boring. So instead of turning right, lap 3 starts here and you take a turn to the left. That way you can do London Loop 3 the intended way. And yes, it's totally allowed to have 2 separate lap gates, just as Calamari Desert. And that is a London Loop. I'm pretty satisfied, and I have my hopes up. This was always one of my biggest guilty pleasures, so let's hope Nintendo sees the opportunity as well. Next up is Vancouver Velocity. This will be a little harder to predict. Not only are there only 2 variants released so far, but both of them go in the opposite direction. In 1 you drive eastward and in 2 you drive westward. So what is the third variant? Well, believe it or not, I was able to find a picture of the entire Vancouver Velocity map, so if we put the existing 2 versions on it, we will find a route that's not been used yet, presumably Vancouver Velocity 3. Admittedly, this route does look kind of underwhelming on its own as it's pretty short. But I have a solution. Let the first lap take control of the first variant. For lap 2, you will take this proposed new route, but before you make that final turn to the finish line, you will turn to the left and play Vancouver Velocity 2. This would be similar to how Sydney Sprint merged its second and third variants, and I think it could work again. Then once you get to the finish line, you can do the first version in reverse for the final lap. This would be nice, but honestly, I'd probably be satisfied whatever they do with it. From what I've seen in Mario Kart Tour, this is probably my favorite city track, so it would be kind of difficult to ruin it. Another solution I have is that lap 3 could start here where you transition from Vancouver 3 to 2. But it might be a little too short, but who knows? I'm going with my first idea anyways, and that is Vancouver Velocity. Then there is Los Angeles laps. This will be by far the hardest track to come up with a layout for in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Not only does every version take place in a completely new setting, their starting lines aren't even at the same spots. You can't even put up a shared starting line anywhere because they're only connected by this piece of land. Like, I want to give this track the Tokyo treatment because atmospherically it would make sense to have one variant correspond one lap. Especially because LA Laps 3 has that epic baseball stadium where you glide over, which would fit for the final lap. But where is the starting line gonna be? We're doomed.
Get a hold of yourself, Albert. You're the King Ligger Baltic YouTuber, so act like one.
I'm sorry, that was the anxiety ray talking. Thanks a lot, Deltron Boris. Good thing I have at least one good brother. It's a nice breath of fresh air after Bertrand Oris constantly invades my videos.
Anytime, Alb. I totally won't betray you in the future.
That's kingly. Anyways, I just realized how we're going to do this, by simply having a different gate for every lap. The starting lap is going to be the same as Los Angeles Laps 1, but a little more north. The second gate will be right here. You'll take a sharp turn to the right and play Los Angeles Laps 2. Then we put the final gate here, where you'll be playing the last variant. The finish line can be the same as the starting line, so you end where you started. Overall, I'd say that is Los Angeles Laps. A little easier than I first thought, but I can totally understand why we didn't see it in Wave 2 now. It's just too ambitious. Our next track is the overrated Berlin Byways. Only the most generic city course there is, outside of Tokyo Blur. Like with Vancouver Velocity, there are only 2 variants released so far. I was able to find a picture of the whole of Berlin Byways though, and apparently the only routes that have not been used so far are these. Obviously, it can't really be used as a separate lap. I mean, how would you do it? I'm gonna do Sydney surgery and combine variants. Lap 1 will start out like Berlin Byways 1, nothing unusual, but instead of turning right to the finish line, you're gonna turn left and take this offshoot path. This is so that when you've done it, you can commence lap 2 and do Berlin Byways 2 in the correct way, since otherwise it would have been reversed. With one minor difference however, as you'll also be taking this detour before heading to the train station. Then we get to the third lap. What should it be? I'd personally go for a reversed version of Berlin 1, but there are many ways this could be done. Should it be the entirety of lap 1 reversed, or just the sections that were in the original Berlin 1? Or maybe we should shortcut with this route. It could be any of them, but personally I'm going with reversed normal Berlin 1. It's not the exact same as the first lap, but it also won't be too short. And that's Berlin Byways. Wait, actually I have another solution. Make it night themed. Seriously, this track is just so basic. And the music screams nightlife chaos. This is the least they could do to make the track a little more distinct from the other city tracks. That is Berlin Byways. Next up is Singapore Speedway. Personally, a little basic, at least the first variant, since it's really just a glorified loop. But it can be fixed. Once again, there are 2 variants that have been released, but unlike the other 2 variant courses I've discussed, I can't find a map of the entirety of this course, so we're just gonna have to figure it out ourselves. We know it's probably gonna go for a portion of the Chinatown, since there is an unused road leading there. And it might presumably lead out here, as there's a landing pad of some sort and a roadway that ultimately connects to Singapore Speedway 1. So now we have a bit of an idea of what it could be, and with that information, let's sprinkle the Tokyo treatment over this course. Lap 1 is Singapore Speedway 1, Lap 2 is 2, and Lap 3 is 3. It's definitely one of the city tracks that could work the best with this feature, assuming that Singapore Speedway 3 will share the same starting point as 1 and 2. And Singapore Speedway is complete. Now we get to Amsterdam Drift. This will be the hardest course to come up with a route for. You see this map? Well, this is Amsterdam Drift 1 and this is 2, the released ones. But guess what? There are so many different pathways unused that I can't even count them all. It's impossible to squeeze all of them into an Amsterdam Drift 3. There's so many different opinions on what it could be, but personally, I think this would be it. Because obviously, there's a reason the tulip field exists. But more importantly, this is gonna be the first time in my prediction when the first version isn't the first lap. The reason being that it's the only one with a gliding ramp, and I'd much rather save that for the final lap. Instead, my proposed third variant will open up the track. It would go through the tulip field, somewhat similar to the field visited in the first lap, That way it can still feel a bit like Amsterdam Drift 1, but still be its own thing. Amsterdam Drift 2 should be lap 2. And here's another reason why I didn't make Amsterdam Drift 1 the first lap. Because otherwise, you do Amsterdam Drift 2 in reverse. And I wanted to be consistent, which Amsterdam Drift 3 would allow us to be. Then once you get to lap 3, you'll take this offshoot route and turn right. That way doing Amsterdam Drift 1 in the correct way as well. Maybe this was a little more complicated than necessary, but I wanted to make this track feel special, and you don't do that by having the glider ramp be exclusive to the first lap. Overall, that is my version of Amsterdam Drift. And so we get to the final city track. That's been released so far, that is. Bangkok Rush. This definitely has potential to become one of the coolest courses in 8 Deluxe. Bangkok Rush 1 on its own was already amazing with so much variety in its locations, so we can all hope the next 2 variants will be too. We already have a bit of an idea of what they could be, thanks to this map. Obviously, you can see this is Bangkok Rush 1, and I think it would do fine as the first lap. Then we have a few unused routes here. Obviously, since there's only one version released so far, it's impossible to know for certain how the other 2 will be, but I've narrowed it down to this. This is Bangkok Rush 2, and this is Bangkok Rush 3. And how will we incorporate this to 8 Deluxe? How about this? Lap 1 is Bangkok Rush 1, like always. Lap 2 is Bangkok Rush 2, until the left turn of it takes you to the finish line. Instead, you continue onward. This is where lap 3 begins, where you go up the ramp and take off from that epic gliding section. And then effectively end the race by driving through the same river that lap 1 opened up with. I personally think this would be the best way to incorporate Bangkok Rush into Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And that was all of the city tracks reimagined. Well, the released ones at least. There will probably be more of them, since we know there will be more than just these in 8 Deluxe from the prefix leak. Should I make a new video when they come out? Let me know. But overall, that was all of the predictions I had. What are your city track predictions for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe? Did you agree with me, or did you have an even more mind-blowing idea? If you liked this video, then please like, share and subscribe to my YouTube channel, as I talk about everything Mario related. That being said, I'm signing off.